be sharing with us on net zero with food packaging. So over to you, Mr. Wong, please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Would like to first of all thank you, the World Green Organization and ESCAP for providing this opportunity to speak on behalf of our company, King's Flair Development Limited, and on behalf of my father as well, Dr. Alex Wong. The use of plastics is deeply ingrained into our daily lives. It's in our phones, computers, tablets, and TVs. It's used in the planes, trains, and cars that we travel in, and it's used in our homes, in the office, and in the restaurants and cafes that we eat in. According to the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the world's annual production of plastics reached 460 million tons in 2019, while also producing around 350 million tons in plastic waste. Most recently, the Hong Kong government released figures showing that Hong Kong disposes over 2,300 tons of plastic waste a day, with only 11% in recycling rate. That's just under 840,000 tons of plastic every year that mostly go into landfills. Single-use plastics has been one of the biggest topics raised over the past years. This has been especially prevalent in the industry that King's Flair is in. We have seen consumer wear companies pivoting to create reusable products in multiple categories, one of which is lunchboxes and food containers. While traditionally, lunchboxes and food containers were targeted for those that brought food from home to eat on the go or at work. But now this includes the food and beverage industry, in which an ecosystem can be created with takeaway boxes that are made with sustainable and recyclable materials. However, we have observed that in general, most food containers and lunchboxes that are currently available on the market are still being made with plastics. Single-use plastic containers lead those in volume. This could be caused by the focus of many traditional manufacturers that generally observe very tight margins and use cheaper plastics such as PP or PE, polypropylene or polyethylene. For them, it is a race to the bottom in order to achieve net profits by selling it at the cheapest price against their competitors. The usage of PP and other plastics is non-desirable in the application of lunchboxes and food containers or in any product, as they require fossil fuels as a main component in production, takes hundreds of years to degrade, pollute our environment, and pose significant health to both animals and human beings. If we think about reusable lunchboxes, we generally see ideas that trend towards sustainable and sturdy materials such as wood, bamboo, stainless steels, and so on. But in using renewable and sustainable materials, there are compromises that are made in the marketable benefits that plastic lunchboxes provide, such as transparency to see what's inside your lunchbox and food container, durability, water resistant, and so on. Using reusable materials is costly. Renewable materials in general are higher in production cost and therefore raises the price of the product. But let me ask you this. Do you believe that there's a market for premium lunchboxes? Can you actually believe that a lunchbox can be a premium product? The lunchbox we designed using stainless steel and bamboo was currently sold by Prada, and you can search it online. It is going for $1,200 on the Prada store. So I would say that there is a market for it. So how do you approach the development of reusable lunchboxes and food containers? These are the three main processes we look at. First of all, we consider alternate materials to plastic, as many are doing so in the current market. These are products, again, with made that I previously mentioned: wood, glass, bamboo, stainless steel. While these materials are sustainable and renewable, they are high in production costs, and they do not offer some of the more marketable benefits that plastic materials have offered. The time and resources needed to build new supply chains, for the sustainable materials such as bamboo, as well as the tooling and the equipment is costly and requires lots of fine-tuning along the way, depending on both what the client wants and what the market demands and the standards are. If there are no solid material alternatives are available, how do we reduce the use of plastics in the product? That is the second approach. Is there a way to develop a product where, although the plastic is not entirely substituted as a material, but we can reduce the use of it in per product? This is what we have been developing in partnership with Starbucks. We have collaborating with Starbucks in collecting the coffee ground waste from their stores and using them in combination with plastics to develop new products. We ultimately hope to achieve a 40 to 50% in mixture of plastic and coffee grounds, almost halving the use of plastics and making a product that can both meet market and client demands, such as being able to go through multiple and reduce the usage of non-environmentally friendly materials. Last but not least, in the case where plastics are unavoidable to use in the products, we approach it by ensuring that the life cycle of these plastics used in the product is extended by at least 2 or 3 times. We ensure that these plastics are able to endure strong chemicals such as detergents and high heat conditions, such as when they are used in a dishwasher or in the microwave. And this ties into what we plan to do in the coming years, as we have partnered up with many academic talents at the top universities in Hong Kong in developing new materials, both plastic and non-plastic, in order to find new solutions for products that are both able to keep up with the demands and the standards of the market and are made with sustainable and environmental friendly materials. These go beyond the applications, of course, just lunchboxes and food containers, but to many other consumer good products. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wong. Please be seated. Of green and sustainable finance in Hong Kong. So please welcome our next speaker, Mr. Kenneth Hui, Head of Market Development, Hong Kong Monetary Authority, onto the stage.
Thank you very much to UNESCAP as well as WGO World Green Organization for the invitation today. It's a great pleasure to have the opportunity to share with you what the government and regulators in Hong Kong have been doing to develop the green and sustainable finance market here. Before getting into detail, it's probably useful to take a step back and think about what we are trying to achieve here. As we all know, climate change is an issue facing all of humanity. Each of us has a part to play, has a role to play in addressing this issue. For Hong Kong as a city, sustainable finance serves 2 key purposes. One is for our own carbon neutrality target. As many of you know, Hong Kong earlier set out our climate action plan, basically setting out a pathway to reduce carbon emission to net zero before 2050. In order to achieve this plan, the government estimates that in the next 15 to 20 years, we will have to spend about 240 billion Hong Kong dollar to take forward various measures to mitigate and adapt to climate change. So our first goal is really to make sure that this investment need is properly financed. Our second objective is that given Hong Kong's role as Asia's international financial center, we believe we have an obligation to support the transformation and the transition of this whole region. Asia, as some of the previous speakers has rightly noted, has one of the world's largest green investment need, $66 trillion for the next 30 years, according to some estimates. This is equivalent to over half of the world's green investment need in the coming 3 decades. And closer to home as well, mainland China will need over $100 trillion RMB over the next 30 years to achieve its own carbon neutrality goal. So our second objective is really to make sure that this investment need in the whole region is properly financed. How do we make sure that our financial industry is able to deliver this? We have a three-pronged strategy here in Hong Kong. First is regulation, to make sure basically we set out clear rules for our financial industry. At the very basic, we want to make sure that financial institutions are properly accounting for, as well as reporting their green and climate impact. What we mean here is a few things. To start with, the HKMA last year released supervisory policy manual to explain to banks and provide guidance on how they can incorporate climate risk as well as environmental impact consideration into their governance, strategy, risk management, and disclosure. The SFC as well, our securities regulator, are now requiring fund manager to take climate-related risks in consideration in their investment as well as risk management, and also to make proper disclosure. Regulators in Hong Kong have also made an early commitment, first in Asia to do so, to require TCFD-compliant disclosure by 2025. And we are now working to support the work of the International Sustainability Standards Board. So that's very much our first strategy, to use regulation as lever to promote green investing. Our second strategy is to support the development of green infrastructure and ecosystem. The purpose here is really to make sure that the industry has the right incentive as well as capability to go green. Talent and data limitation are often cited as the key challenges hindering further industry development, not just in Hong Kong, but globally. To address these issues, last year we set up the Green and Sustainable Finance Center as a platform to promote cooperation between the industry, the government, as well as the academic sector. For example, we are now developing a competency standard for sustainable finance for banking practitioners. And to encourage the take-up of green and sustainable finance training as well as qualification, we are now launching, with the help, to support the government to launch a capacity building support scheme, basically to pay for the sustainable finance training as well as qualification that practitioners and students would like to take. We're also working with the industry to develop more internship opportunity and training for students. On climate data, our work is to focus on improving data availability and accessibility, as well as data analytic capability. One key initiative that we've taken so far is to set up a centralized repository to put all the climate-related data that we can identify into it in a consistent format. Starting with government data, we've been working slowly down the list, and now we're on to SME climate impact data, which will be available soon. At the same time, we're also developing a free and publicly accessible emission estimation tools for cases where actual data are not available. Building on the cross-cutting regulatory framework and ecosystem that I mentioned just now, the third prong of our strategy is to give an extra push to some of the key areas that we believe are particularly promising. The obvious priority is sustainable bond. I think my previous speakers have also mentioned the promise as well as the potential of green bond. Here we're really building on our strength as Asia's leading fundraising center, not just in equity, which is well known, but also in bond as well, which we have been the #1 center in the past 6 years in a row and raised more than $200 billion in 2021 alone. But we've also chosen sustainable bond because it is very much the first sustainable finance market to show promises. Starting only in 2007, it has grown to over $500 billion worldwide last year. So what exactly have we done? To set benchmark and create demonstrative effect, we established the government green bond program in 2018 and have so far launched issuances totaling nearly $10 billion with different currency, tenor, as well as investor group. We also recognize that sometimes a more tangible push is needed to help issuers to overcome the inertia and really take the first step in going for green financing. So with that in mind, the government launched the Green and Sustainable Finance Grant Scheme last year to subsidize issuance and external review costs of green bonds and loans. We've also stepped up our engagement, not just among corporate issuers, but also among government entity. So say, for example, since last year, the local government of Shenzhen and Hainan have issued mainland local government offshore sustainable bonds in Hong Kong. Another important sustainable finance market is investing. Well, here again, the logic is quite compelling. It takes two to tango, so we want to make sure that there are enough and a broad range of suppliers of capital in the sustainable finance market, in addition to issuers. Also, Hong Kong is one of Asia's largest and leading asset and wealth management center. We manage over $4.5 trillion US. So what we can do could have much wider impact on the whole region. Our work in sustainable investing started with a similar approach of raising awareness. The HKMA, for example, has been leading by example to incorporate ESG factor into our investment process. We've also been investing in green assets since 2015. On regulation as well, as I mentioned earlier, the SFC has been introducing disclosure as well as risk management for ESG funds. The result achieved so far has been quite remarkable, I would say. In sustainable bond, for example, last year around a third of Asia's international green bond were issued in Hong Kong, well ahead of other jurisdictions. And this growth is spilling into adjacent area, for example, in the loan market, sustainable loan market. Last year, $25 billion US of sustainable loan was done in Hong Kong. The strong momentum is also continuing into this year despite some pretty heavy headwind in the overall market. And we're looking to see the market reaching record high this year again. In green investing too, ESG funds in Hong Kong continue to grow. In June 2022, this year, there were 135 SFC authorized ESG funds, more than doubling from a year ago, and they're managing in total more than $120 billion US of assets. Looking ahead, carbon credit is a key area that we're studying. The market has been around for some time, but it hasn't really achieved critical mass despite the effort of various jurisdictions. So we believe Hong Kong has a unique role to play here, given our role as the connector between mainland and the rest of the world, and also our position as an international financial center. As you all know, China is the world's largest greenhouse gas emitter, and it's also got a nascent carbon market, so we believe Hong Kong can tap into this. Following a feasibility study earlier this year, the Hong Kong Stock Exchange launched Core Carbon in October, basically an international voluntary carbon trading market. We understand that it will take time to build credibility, liquidity, as well as recognition. We are seeing early promise, though. So far, more than 40 trades have already been recorded on the exchange, representing a total volume of 400,000 tons of carbon credit. And we are seeing participants from over 20 financial institutions, as well as corporate, from the mainland, Hong Kong, as well as the rest of the world. So the market is growing and a lot is being done, and I urge you to participate and take an active role in it as well. This is very much what I want to say. I hope you find it useful, and thank you very much again.
Development, International Chamber of Sustainable Development, to come up on stage and share about an overview of ESG rating, dilemma or essentials. Ms. Lam, please.
Thank you for having me here to talk about an overview of ESG rating, dilemma or essentials. I'm going to split it into 3 parts. Why ESG rating matters? What ESG ratings measure? ESG rating, whether it's a dilemma or essentials. First part, why ESG ratings matters? We all wish to do well by doing good. To be sustainable, we now evaluate a company using ESG aspects. We wish to place our investment in companies that care for our planet and people while making profits. Companies are keen to get a good ESG rating to protect and improve companies' reputation, attract investors, easily access capital, and win tenders. Good ESG rating help to attract talent and recognize achievements, build a baseline to strengthen performance. ESG ratings help to align ESG measurement and reporting. A survey result showed that 78% of asset owners agree that there is a need to improve standards around ESG products to diminish greenwashing. From investor perspective, ESG ratings provide great product transparency and comparability. It helps asset managers to communicate the ESG-related features of their product. Here, I list popular ESG rating agencies, showing they have different coverages, different number of data points, and scoring level. Some use company data, and some use secondary party information as well. In a recent research of US common stock from 2002 to 2019, with ratings from 6 major agencies, it's observed that the average rating correlation is only 48%. Rating agencies use different sets of attributes, different measurement approaches, and different views on the relative importance of different risks. Thus, we will have different results for the same company from different agencies. So what ESG rating actually measure? It measures a company's performance and risk on ESG factors against its peer group, not so much about their impact on the world. Negative practices don't bring down ESG score if there is no implied cost to a company. A tobacco company can get reasonably good score against by performing well on issues like soil conservation or fair trade, though its products can kill its customers. Look at Tesla. It was taken out from S&P 500 index in May this year. It's due to their issues on social and governance aspect. Tesla has fallen behind its peers when examined through a wider ESG lens, according to S&P. Concerns around allegation of racial discrimination, poor working conditions in factory, and product safety of autopilot function about that product were highlights. At the same time, the market is questioning Exxon being in the top 10 of S&P 500 ESG index. Indeed, the methodology to come up with ESG rating and ESG index is critical. MSCI is one of the top 3 rating agencies, according to the market share. MSCI adopts a materiality map to determine the weighting of the score that is assigned to each ESG factor. MSCI concerns product carbon footprint, opportunity in clean tech for automobile manufacturers like Tesla under environmental factors. It weights product safety and quality under social factors at about 20%. governance factors always make up 1/3 of the ESG score. MSCI is also a leading provider of ESG-focused indexes and still include Tesla when S&P kick it out. It's important to observe rating changes over the year. As you can see in the recent report, Tesla looked like maintained at A flat for about 3 years. But indeed, Tesla was downgraded from AAA to A from 2017 to 2019, according to MSCI information. It's more interesting to look at Tesla's area for improvement is product safety and quality, according to MSCI analysis. This point matched S&P's view. MSCI also highlighted that Tesla misaligned target in temperature rise. It doesn't have or it doesn't disclose decarbonization targets. The next slide is about Sustainalytics. It's one of the top 3 ESG rating agencies in terms of market share. It focuses on ESG risk exposure and risk management of a company. Tesla has been rated at medium risk in terms of risk exposure and average in terms of risk management. It's true that different rating agencies give different results. It may give a better picture by analyzing a company from different perspectives. At the same time, it may be quite confusing. So I'm going to talk about whether it's a dilemma in ESG rating. I wish to highlight 3 major challenges. We're concerned about limited access of ESG rating or data due to cost barrier. We look forward to reasonable cost and public access. We wish that companies are motivated to voluntarily disclose ESG information. We hope that there are measures to mitigate potential conduct risk of provider in terms of any conflict of interest. We wish that there is open access, public search, via centralized data and tech platforms for ESG rating. We also concerned to ensure ESG ratings are fit for its purposes. It should not only focus on ESG performance or risk, but should extend wider ESG analysis to understand companies' ESG impacts on our beloved world. Asset owners are encouraged to adopt double materiality approach to consider companies' ESG impact on the world, not just ESG performance and risk of the company targeting to get investment return. It requires expertise in qualitative analysis to harvest insight from the ESG rating when making investment decisions. Asset owners are encouraged to play an active stewardship role and influence companies' ESG strategy, behavior, and action by voting and engagement activities based on ESG analysis, including ESG rating. To respond ratings disparity, we encourage open discussion about how ESG performance should be defined and measured to achieve comparability. Rating agents to improve transparency about its rating objective, methodology, and data sources. It is necessary to enhance investor education to understand and interpret ESG rating properly. I think ESG ratings are essential. We concern ESG rating impacts on equity ownership. A recent research using MSCI rating changes from 2013 to 2020 shows that rating downgrades reduce ownership by US equity mutual funds with a dedicated ESG strategy, while upgrades increase it. Also, we're concerned about the ESG rating on a company practices. The observation from the same research shows that companies adjust ESG practices following rating changes, but seems focused on governance dimension. In another research of ESG ratings, it shows ESG-conscious investors, including pension funds and foundation endowment, host 23% of green stock share when the ratings agree each other. It drops to 18% when the ratings don't agree. Uncertainty of ESG rating may give rise to an increase in financial cost for green companies and thus limits their capacity to generate real social impacts. I agree with Professor Robato. He suggests that ESG is a measurement of unethical behavior. It's like a judicial system relying on the use of intermediaries, which are rating agencies in the case of ESG, and the continuous improvement of the practices involved. Borrowing his idea, ESG rating may play a critical role in society, but rely on incomplete data and evidence to make often controversial decisions. Despite its noise, it's a useful signal in the available data, and the investor may gain alpha from using it to change companies' behavior. We are progressing in this journey to drive sustainable development results together. We look forward to free access of public ESG information offered by companies. It is important to understand what makes up an ESG rating, its objective, methodology, and data sources. ESG rating shouldn't be just a commercial product to sell the company's potential in grasping ESG opportunity or managing ESG risk to gain return. It should be more about ESG. It should be more about companies' impacts on the world to achieve sustainable development goals. ESG ratings should aim to help us to do well by doing good, both in managing companies and investing in those companies which work towards sustainable development. I'm a volunteer serving at International Chamber of Sustainable Development. We are an NGO and a non-profit making organization. We drive ESG through education. We welcome you to drop by our booth outside and check more how we may drive positive changes together. Thank you for your attention.
Begin our panel discussion on ESG data rating and reporting. Please welcome our moderator, Mr. Sean Sebastian Jackton, Managing Partner, Cavendish Investing Corporation. And our panelists on the stage, Ms. Helena Fong, Head of Sustainable Investment of Asia Pacific, FTSE Russell. Mr. Rohit Kodancha, Co-founder, Chief Revenue Officer, ESG Data and Solutions, who will be joining us online. And of course, with Ms. Dilys Lam, Vice Chairman, Development, International Chamber of Sustainable Development. And last but not least, Mr. Marvin Tang, Head of Sustainability Strategy, Apex Schroders. Please welcome everyone on the stage with a warm round of applause.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this panel. The ESG data reporting, and obviously, the last session that Dilys was quite insightful, so thank you very much for this. I would like to introduce today our speakers. We have Mrs. Elena Fung, who's actually the head of sustainable investment for Asia Pacific at FTSE Russell. We have Dilys Lam, who actually was our speaker at our last panel, and she's obviously, as she mentioned, part of this NGO, which is International Chamber of Sustainable Development. And we have Mr. Mervyn Tang, who's the head of Sustainable Strategy APAC for Schroders. We also have Mr. Rohit Kandacha, who's the co-founder, Chief Revenue Officer, ESG Data Solution, joining us by video conference. So I will probably just give a little introduction because we've already delved into the topic, but we have three main components, and those are the data, rating, and reporting. So if we would just want to summarize what is ESG data, it's actually the information on a business and its impact on its surroundings. And as such, this data is a form of alternative data that can be used in a company analysis. We're seeing a lot of investors that are actually using it to identify the low-risk business investment opportunities based on a company's environmental and ethical aspect. Now, the second component is indeed ESG ratings, and Dilys explained very much in detail what it covers, but it was indeed created by research firms and rating agencies on proprietary methodologies. And this data includes obviously disclosures and the process of a company assessing their ESG. And there's a resulting scores that obviously, these companies have to abide with. The last component really is the ESG reporting, and that's the disclosure of data covering the company's operation in three areas: environmental, social, and corporate governance. And it actually provides a snapshot of the business impact in these three areas for investors. So maybe, we will cover all of this, but my first question probably is more in line of a topic that has been debating a lot. Is there really a convergence of standardized reporting framework when it comes to ESG data reporting? And perhaps Elena could give us a bit more insight on that?
Thank you, John Sebastian, and thanks for the invitation to join the panel. Very pleased to be here this morning. So the answer to your question is firstly an emphatic yes. There is a clear convergence of alignment in terms of reporting frameworks and standards. There's also, I think, a nuance to that, which is that even as we see some of the major sort of standard setters and framework providing bodies come together to help to clear up this sort of what's called the alphabet soup of ESG reporting, which I think has led or lent itself to an element of confusion on the part of both companies that are asked to report, also investors trying to navigate the available data in the market. So in that sense, we've seen, and I think there are a few examples that I'd point out of where we do see that drive for convergence. So one of them is a joint effort under the WEF, which is maybe one of the more important ones to call out, which is the convergence or the coming together of 5 of the major standard-setting bodies in CDP, the Climate Disclosure Standards Boards, GRI, IIRC, and SASB. So I think in that sense, I think the standard-setting bodies themselves are seeing that they're going to need to really help to clear up some of that confusion by working more closely together. Another really important development, of course, is the establishment of the ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board, under the IFRS Foundation trustees, and we're looking forward to seeing more from them next year as well. So I would say definitely yes in terms of those major international frameworks. The nuance to that, though, that I would call out, and I think this is particularly relevant from an Asia perspective, is the emergence of sort of specific market level standards. I mean, for example, we've seen the Association of Banks in Singapore come out with its 27 questions. I think we saw 35 questions come out from Malaysia recently. So we are seeing that sort of implementation in terms of the application of some of these frameworks and a minimum standard of data points within different markets. And that's fine. I think we're going to see that in Asia anyway. It's more about alignment. So if we think about, for example, TCFD being a framework around which we're seeing global convergence, even from those standard-setting bodies, we're then seeing a level of kind of interpretation on a market basis. And I think the other thing to say, of course, and I think we'll get into this a little bit, is that what we regard as ESG data is developing. So if we think about the emergence of taxonomies as well, we're seeing a level of fragmentation there, which I think will also need to go through that sort of process of coming together of different standards so that we don't breed kind of further confusion as new standards come to light.
Thank you, Elena. And as you mentioned, level of fragmentation is indeed something that we're seeing. So maybe, Rohit, I would ask you this question. Is divergence of ESG ratings really an issue?
Thank you, John Sebastian, and World Green Organization for having me here. So I like the part that after convergence, we are talking about divergence. That's the reality we are living today with obviously different views, evolving taxonomies across the globe. Now to the question around divergence of ESG ratings, and is that really an issue? Ratings or score dissonance is a constant debate when investors and clients see different scores for the same company. Example, ExxonMobil rated BBB average by rating agency A and 36.5 or high risk by another. AES Corporation, AA leader by one, whereas high risk in another. Apple has 3 widely divergent ratings. So MIT Sloan's research, actually rightly titled the Aggregate Confusion Project, says amongst the 6 prominent ESG assessment agency, the correlation is 0.61, whereas credit ratings you see 0.92. So obviously those debates comes in. Why is this happening? Now difference in views can happen, and that's not a key issue here. Lack of transparency, how issues are weighted, makes investors more wary, and this has increased the trust deficit to a great extent. Now let's try to understand what contributes to this variance, right? So each score rating provider measure proprietary ESG parameters. They use different materiality, industry classification, so on and so forth. So 4 key parameters to talk about that. So number 1, factors, right? Multiple factors could be considered. Within E, S, and G, each rating agency could consider multiple factors. Then is the sector classification. Sector and industry classification are also used to identify risk issues that matter. Some use GICS, some use ISIC. It could either be the difference in the classification is usually either one adopts a production-oriented approach or the other one would use a market-oriented approach. So that is another one important variable. Third is the materiality itself. So materiality in ESG varies from one industry to another. For instance, patient care and biomedical waste management is most important when it comes to healthcare. But whereas data security and data privacy becomes also important critical risks for the retail industry. And the divergence can occur when certain indicators or issues are assigned more weight than others by various providers. Some also use equal weighting concept. Now, ESG rating agencies have developed their own proprietary definitions. There is also the different scales related factor. Some use AAA to CCC, some use A+ to D, 0 to 100, and so on and so forth. So does this variation invalidate ratings? Not necessarily, right? So having a different score essentially means assessment of risk management approach of a company is actually accurate. The impact of company as gauged through controversies also remain valid. The inter-se performance between companies on same scale is also appropriate. What is important, though, is to bring in transparency. The off-the-shelf reports might not alone solve your problem of identifying alpha differentiators or identifying key ESG risk. Investors will need more transparency. So they'll need the ability to adjust factors, find ESG top performers. I understand relevant issues, reweight the exposures where important. So each investor will have a different investment strategy, and they will need the ability to weigh issues and closely align with their values and goals.
Thank you, Rohit. And indeed, lack of transparency has been, something that has been talked a lot, especially with the next question that I will have for Dilys. And this question is really how are ESG data and ratings contributing in addressing greenwashing concerns?
Actually, I echo what Wohad just said. It's important to address greenwashing concerns by providing clarity on what different ratings and data portals are intended to measure or use. It's better to clarify the definition of terms using in ESG ratings to improve consistency of understanding. Otherwise, investors may assume that ESG rating based on ESG risk is indicative of a company ESG impact across all industries. It's essential that rating providers offer clarity and transparency on what their ratings on company means. Second point is we should protect our retail investor. Retail investor constitute a small portion but a growing slice of ESG investment market. We need to pay attention how ESG ratings portals are promoted, particularly in retail markets when end users will be less aware of what the ratings are measuring or how those ratings should be applied in investment decision making. Lastly, we should also address potential conflict of interest as what I just shared. Ensuring there is alignment of interest between ESG rating and end user is essential. There has been no industry support for the regulation of fee models at this stage. Whichever fee model is used, subscription-based or issue-based, the industry should address any potential conflict of interest and put in place a clear governance and disclosure arrangement relating to pricing and third-party relationship to address conduct risk.
Thank you, Dilys. Now, more from a private sector finance angle, my next question will be for Mervyn. How do asset managers use ESG data and ratings, and what are the challenges that you've seen so far with the various approaches?
Thank you. I think this question is important because it goes into, does convergence and divergence matter in ratings in the first place? And I find it interesting because you don't get the same conversation of, oh, why is there divergence of sell-side broker recommendations when it comes to financial analysis? But you have this conversation in ESG. And I think it's this, at times, assumptions that, oh, as an investor, we simply take, oh, we'll invest in the most sustainable companies and we'll not invest in the least sustainable companies, and it's going to be the driver of our decision. In reality, there's a lot of different ways we can think about sustainability. We can look at companies that are more or less sustainable, but also understand what the valuation implications are. So maybe we adjust for the sustainability rating based on some discounted cash flow adjustment or some value adjustment. We might not necessarily think actually the most sustainable companies are the ones that are best valued. Maybe we see companies that could improve in ratings in the future because they've got a good decarbonization pathway, or we just believe in the good quality of the management of the company. And so it's not a very automated approach where we just, MSCI says this and this is how we think about sustainability. Now, where it is important is that it's worth also talking about how investors have a few objectives and few use cases for ESG data and ratings. And so one is for ESG integration, which is just to incorporate ESG issues and data into our risk analysis and return analysis. And that's really about trying to be less myopic with kind of, compared to traditional financial analysis, think about the implications for climate change, human rights, supply chain due diligence. All of those issues need to be incorporated. But there's a second bit which I think people kind of link to and think about a lot is the product design and product creation. So that could be a green bond fund, it could be a climate change fund, it could be a thematic healthcare innovation fund. And those funds could use, some would use ESG ratings, some may use specific data points. It could be the emissions carbon footprint, it could be the carbon trajectory, it could be the revenue profile of a company and what themes it's aligned to. But we'll design and create kind of credible strategies using the data available, at the same time recognizing that the data is not necessarily foolproof. There's going to be things you have to adjust, things you have to estimate as part of that process. And so for me, just I guess the ultimate point is, because the asset managers use data in this way, the fact that there's divergence and convergence is not the problem. It's that transparency that Dilys and Rohit mentioned, and that we need to know when a rating is poor or good, what drives it, and does it align with the use cases that we're trying to apply.
Thank you, Mervyn. Regarding data, and I will address my next question to Elena, how do ESG data and score are applied in practice? And especially, emerging use case for ESG ratings and data across the capital markets value chain, because this is really, as Mervyn was just mentioning, from financial analysis, it implies a lot.
Yeah, thanks, John Sebastian. So I think the interesting point here, and Mervyn described very well how ESG data is being integrated in, from an investment standpoint, into portfolio construction. And I would say, we've traditionally thought of ESG data. It's come out of a desire for investors to want to take account of what are regarded as extra or non-financial risks, additional to traditional financial factors when they're assessing the risk and the opportunities in their portfolios. So that's really been, I think, the starting point for ESG data. But what we're seeing now as these concerns become mainstream across the spectrum of financial markets is that both from a regulatory standpoint, but also in terms of the capital markets and the value chain, there is a desire to integrate risks in different aspects of how companies are valued and for different purposes. So we're seeing a lot of regulation, but also banks wanting to take account of factors that might impact company valuations in, for example, their loan books. That's being driven partly by a desire to understand risk through mechanisms like scenario analysis, climate stress testing. But it's also, I think, being driven by the banks as well in terms of the engagement that they're doing with their clients. So I think it's really that broadening of the use case for financial data, for ESG data that we're seeing that's driving, in many ways, kind of an innovation in terms of how we're broadening out even the spectrum of companies that are being assessed. So traditionally, we've looked at the largest, most liquid companies. Those are the ones that usually make up investment portfolios. We're seeing now private equity companies really getting very involved in this space with unlisted companies. And also, as I mentioned, the banks. So then you're looking at SME data, again, private companies that maybe haven't been assessed for their ESG profile before, and having to identify that data. And then that brings us into a question about how companies are going to report, right? What are the tools available for them to calculate their Scope 1, Scope 2 emissions, understanding how they're thinking about climate change from a strategy, a governance perspective. So it's really, I think, bringing the use case into the mainstream and understanding that this is broader now than it has been in the past. It's going past the traditional investment use case and really, across the value chain.
Thank you, Elena. And you mentioned indeed what are the tools, and perhaps from a macro level, at a higher level, and my question will be for Dilys on that topic specifically. To what extent do ESG data and ratings market could be regulated?
ESG rating products face no direct regulation at this stage. Self-report from companies or policy data are not verified or audited. It invites questions about its reliability and relevance for investors to make informed investment decisions. Industry regulator and policy makers all play active part in the development of ESG rating markets. The International Regulatory Strategy Group in UK encourages us to create a right balance between protecting investors and encouraging innovative competitive markets. The future regulation should be proportionate to the evolving ESG market. The industry needs to show leadership in developing an effective marketplace, supported by a proportionate regulatory system. This requires clear principles and priorities, avoid the danger of rushing to adopt extensive and potentially prescriptive regulatory solution. It shouldn't create barriers to new rating agencies to enter the market.
Thank you, Dilys. Obviously, there's the geographical aspect, and my next question will be for Rohit. How do you see Asia's role in molding the ESG landscape?
Thank you. Yeah, I would like to address this specific question in two parts. One, what are the drivers of increasing ESG adoption? What's happening in Asia, essentially, and the need for looking at Asia with an Asian lens. Now, on the drivers increasing ESG adoption, let me start by mentioning that most of the global supply chains today originate in the East and the emerging markets. And the global supply chain can take any form, either as a foreign direct investment by multinational enterprises through their wholly owned subsidiaries and JVs, or via arm's length transactions, outsourcing global firms, outsourcing their products and services through contractual relationships through their first tier suppliers or subcontractors. Now, with increasing supply chains and global interlinkages, the companies operating in Asia and emerging markets have started to embrace ESG or have been embracing ESG. That's one of the factors. This is, again, both due to internal and external factors we are seeing this change. For instance, a global value chain and global companies are being evaluated in the home jurisdictions, and this means the supply chains are being taken into account as well. Now, just to give you an example, we are a fintech startup, been in existence for just over 2 years, and we are already submitting our environmental disclosures and performance to CDP and also the global supply chains. Other factors include regulations, ESG becoming important for raising capital, and also the fact that companies are genuinely becoming more conscious. Within Asia, we are also seeing governments trying to work on their net zero goals. And as a result, the central bankers and regulators are adopting ESG frameworks. We are already seeing that. In India, there is mandatory disclosure of BRSR requirements. There is Singapore, Japan, China, South Korea, Philippines. Everyone are working on the regulations, and it's constantly, fastly evolving. And these are key factors which is driving this ESG change and ESG growth as well, or ESG adoption. Second is the Asia ESG data and ranking challenges, right? The one size fits all doesn't work. You need to look at Asia wearing an Asian lens. And when I say that, essentially, while the targets might be the same, like target net zero, etc., but the legal, social, and governance environment framework differs in each of the Asian geographies. It can't be directly compared with the Western geographies, for instance, right? So due to evolving landscape, most of the rating providers historically were concentrating on the West. The Eastern Hemisphere wasn't well represented either in global ESG indexes, and the local nuances were not always considered while evaluating the performance. So as part of ESG data and ranking, there needs to be good understanding and knowledge in terms of local nuances in Asia and the regulations if you have to evaluate the performance. Just an example, in US, a New York Stock Exchange company must have majority of directors meeting independence requirements as per the listed company manual. Whereas in Japan, under Companies Act, company which adopts company with 3 board committees does not have a requirement of majority of outside directors. Now, there are more examples. To sum it up, yes, the next growth in ESG will be dominated by Asia, but to ensure ESG assessments is useful, there needs to be a local angle, local lens, local nuances which needs to be taken in account for. And investors, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, will need more transparency as to how this is being evaluated. Thank you.
Thank you, Rohit. And you're absolutely right. The one-size-fits-all model does not apply, and you have to take into account local consideration. So perhaps my last question will be for Mervyn, and it's a continuation of our previous, panelist. How does ESG data and rating differs in Asia, and what does that mean for investors specifically?
I think, so the most common answer you get to this question is the data is worse in Asia, which I think is true. You don't have something like the EU CSRD or NFRD kind of aligning reporting, and it makes it more challenging to navigate data, particularly with each market and each jurisdiction having slightly different takes on disclosure and kind of what the requirements are. But there is I think the data part is a challenge that we face to some degree across the world, and it's not necessarily an Asia-specific problem, if a little bit more intensified. I think that kind of how do we actually use that data and how do we interpret it in the Asian context is a really important one. And I think it goes to what you're trying to do with the data. So maybe let's take an example on the rating side, and let's take governance frameworks in Asia. So we have much more conglomerates and family ownership companies in the region. A lot of governance assessments in ESG ratings actually score negatively against that. So they look for more dispersed shareholdings, they are against concentrated ownership. Now, there's a reason for that, because concentrated ownership can lead to disproportionate power in members of the board. It can lead to poor asset allocation, but it can also lead to, if we think about it in the Asian context, a long-running history of management and an understanding of a particular business or market. And if you're, let's say, a fixed income investor, your exposure could be quite different. So if I'm a fixed income investor, I may be more comfortable with a family that I've been lending to for 20 years versus a board which has just come in and just IPO'd company where there's lots of pressure to leverage up and earn. So what is the reason why we're looking at this? And then I think the second bit is, if we look at Asia, undoubtedly we're a more carbon intensive region. And so when we look at these higher carbon footprint numbers, what does that mean? The fact that many Asian companies have higher carbon is in part a reflection of the grid being more carbon intensive. So even if they did the same actions that a company would do in Europe, let's say electrify let's say I switch from a blast furnace to an electric arc furnace as a steelmaker, my carbon emissions are still going to be high because I'm taking high carbon from the grid. So do I just go, okay, well, no, this company is bad because it's carbon intensive, or is it taking the right steps that is to reduce their carbon emissions? And maybe that's reliant on further policy actions. Are they taking steps in terms of, I think, also the kind of additional considerations that they need to take when it comes to energy stability, energy security, because of the nature of the market? So do you really want, let's say, a coal company in Indonesia to just completely shut down and leave employees no longer working and no longer providing power? And so then it becomes a conversation of, okay, well, what are they doing to engage with their, if the endangered communities? How are they thinking about accelerated decommissioning of their existing assets? It's a nuanced analysis ultimately when you get into the investment level, as opposed to, I think, that kind of, you know what, high carbon is worse, or lower ESG ratings is worse.
Thank you very much. Do we have perhaps any questions, or? If not, I want to thank you, our panelists, and thank you for joining us today.
So ladies and gentlemen, later on, Ms. Moss Severin-Monet will be sharing with us on ESG and impact investing.
Dear William Yu, dear attendees, thank you very much for inviting me to speak at this third ESG conference 2022 at the Cyberport in Hong Kong. It's wonderful to see that Hong Kong is back with in-person conferences. But unfortunately, I won't be with you. I'm traveling. But I wish I was there in this wonderful and vibrant Cyberport. It's my pleasure, it's my honor to have the opportunity to be one of the keynote speakers and share on behalf of the Global Impact Investing Network some perspective on the future trend of impact investing. And maybe I'll start with the good news. We have just released our annual landmark survey, and impact investing today, it's a market size of above $1 trillion USD. 1 trillion, which is also a fast-growing sector. So it's actually a significant amount of funding to solve economic and environmental issues. I will particularly focus today on the role of the GIN, the Global Impact Investment Network, that I represent, and expand a bit on its role on building the ecosystem in impact investment. But before I do that, I'd like to start with my personal journey, and I hope it will somehow illustrate what is impact investment and illustrate it with some Asian perspective. And I started basically 15 years ago with a very large asset manager in emerging Asia and became actually one of the leaders in the sector. And most of my experience is in financial inclusion and climate finance. And when we started, it was really with the assumption that billions of people in emerging countries would actually join the global economy, meaning they were not anymore poor and inaccessible people in rural and remote communities, but actually emerging consumers and producers. And the core of the business thesis was that we could invest in companies serving affordable and reliable products and services in emerging countries. All that while generating a return, all that while generating a positive impact. What's the situation today when we are emerging from COVID? I don't need really to remind you that we have, since last week, 8 billion people on this planet, and mostly in emerging countries, which also means access to basic needs, access to financial inclusion, access to education, access to financing for smallholder farmers, and there are many, access to energy, preferably clean energy, if we want to stay below the 1.5 degrees that was agreed in the Paris Agreement. And at the same time, we are facing huge challenges, I would say existential challenges. 2020 was the Earth's second hottest year ever. Just in 2022, we had record-shattering temperature in Europe, in America, in Asia. Close to us, we had Pakistan with unprecedented floods submerging the country. I think it should be somehow a wake-up call on how finance should be channeled to solve some of these pressing social and environmental issues. And my experience of impact investing is that when there are great development challenges, it's also create economic opportunities. So today, I will be speaking on behalf of the Global Impact Investment Network. We are the organization which is dedicated to increase the scale and effectiveness of impact investing around the world. And we do it by building a community of practice among more than 400 organizations across 50 countries. And we have asset owners, asset managers, pension funds, family offices, some of them being located in Asia Pacific. And what is really impact investment? And I know there is a lot of terminology out there. I know it can be confusing. There may be the temptation to define everything and create clear boundaries. I think what really makes impact investment different from other sustainability approaches has been defined by its core characteristic. And its characteristic are defined by the Global Impact Investment Network, but it was also done in partnership with leading impact investors who have actually defined what is a credible impact investing. In substance, it's really about an intention to generate positive, measurable, social or environmental impact. So it makes it different from other strategies. It's really about intentionality, targeting specific social, environmental issues, and invest in solution outcomes. It's also about measurement. And why measurement? You need actually impact data to measure the social and environmental impact of your investment. If you don't have data, you don't have a proven impact, you have only good intentions, you may be also opening the door to impact wash or greenwash. And you need to manage your impact performance. And maybe most of you are probably in the financial sector. So if you revert your minds to what is investment portfolio, you are actually managing your financial performance. You are managing your, with data. Actually, impact, it's not really different. Impact investors are also tracking and following their impact, incorporating impact metrics. It's exactly like receiving an investment report from an investment manager, and this is an impact case studies, which is sitting along financial data. So what are the trends today of impact investment? And I start really with solutions across asset classes. A decade ago, when I started, most of investment was really in private debt and private equity. Today, we see new asset classes emerging, and in particular listed equity. So I'd like to mention the work we have done in consultation with the financial industry, including in Hong Kong, with the support of many professional associations, a draft guidance to actually help harmonizing industry thinking around what is impact in listed equities. And it's actually a great development because listed equities has the potential to increase impact at scales and also attract new institutional asset owners and new type of investors. So that's one, impact through new asset classes. We have also new solutions across sector, and we do identify in our annual survey the sectors of preference of impact investors. Of course, climate finance, it's on top of everyone's agenda and investment, and it goes through many solutions, renewable energy, solar energy, access to distributed energy. But we see also an emergence of much of innovative solutions. Think of nature-based solutions. Think of solutions to protect and restore biodiversity or stop land degradation. Another topic which is very popular, it's around financial inclusion. And today it's done, of course, by microfinance institutions, but also by other kind of financial institutions, such as fintechs. And think of fintech who are trying to reach out to the missing segment of consumers. Think of SMEs in emerging Asia. Think of women in emerging Asia. Think at the business model of bringing affordable credit savings and remittances. And we do see as well emerging sectors in food and agriculture, food security, smart agriculture, water and sanitation, healthcare, and technology has certainly emerged from the COVID crisis as a critical overarching theme to provide basic services across sector. And think of EdTech, of health tech, and climate tech solution. So that's really for the sectors. And now I'd like to say a word about the tools available. After a decade of work, the GIN has actually developed a golden standard of impact measurement. It's called IRIS+. You are welcome to have a look at it. It's a public tool, so it's available on our website. But what is really interesting is that we are moving from this common language around metrics to benchmarks. And I'm proud to report that we have launched the first impact performance benchmark on financial inclusion earlier on this year. And it's important because moving forward, investors will be able to look at their impact data and make decisions based on those data using also benchmark. And we have launched, and we have announced it in October, our Impact Lab. It's actually an industry initiative with strategic partners. One of them is in Asia, it's Temasek, and others are Equity Foundation and Visa Foundation. And we will together develop impact intelligence tools, we will develop benchmark, and it really help to focus on this connection between impact, risk, and financial return. So maybe as a conclusion, I'd like to focus a bit on Hong Kong and how Hong Kong can also develop in impact investing. And today we are talking about Hong Kong as a super connector for the GBA, and between China, the world, and the region. And being based in Hong Kong, it's a great pleasure to witness the emergence of impact investment. There is no conference anymore where people are not talking about positive impact, unlocking impact, investing with impact, etc. Just last month, we hosted the Global Impact Forum in Europe, in Den Haag. We had more 1,500 participants joining in person, and including a delegation from Hong Kong, which was led by the Financial Service and Development Council. So if we take a step back and ask ourselves what is needed to develop as a place of excellence for impact investing, I would say we need drivers and we need enablers. Driver, it's really capital allocators, family offices, of course, and today many of them are thinking of allocating assets to impact investment. We need institutional investors, And I'd like to mention that we will start a series of roundtables in Hong Kong with institutional asset owners with the support of the Financial Service and Development Council. And we are hoping it will really drive also this sector and help institutional asset owners to adopt a systematic approach to impact investing as part of their investment strategy. So if you are an institutional asset owner and you have not been approached yet, please contact me to join these roundtables. Among the drivers, we have also regulatory, what I would call regulatory innovation. It comes mostly from Europe, with the European taxonomy, which is creating a common language around sustainability. And it may also have an impact on Asia. Some regulators plan to implement this taxonomy. Some impact managers are also willing to access the European market, so it's actually an important driver. And what are the enablers? I would say it's really about capturing opportunities at several levels, depending on what type of investors you are. It can be local, it can be regional, it can be in Asia. And it's really also the role of innovative asset managers to design appropriate products and think at sectors where needs are access to finance, climate finance, healthcare, education, sustainable agriculture. There are really opportunities in many sectors. It's also about building an ecosystem, and we need a whole value chain of asset managers across asset classes, private debt, private equity, capital markets, of course, asset owners, consultants, advisors. We need innovation and to stimulate the use of technologies. And last but not least, investing on skills and capacity building. I have the pleasure to speak as guest lecturer in many universities today, from undergraduate to MBA, so there is certainly no lack of interest to equip financial practitioners into impact investment. And moving forward, I think we will need more trainers of trainers, and also certification. So thank you. I'll conclude on what is needed to drive this transformation. And I think it's really about innovation, leadership, and confident action. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to start our next panel discussion, which is on development of sustainable financial instrument. So please first now welcome our moderator, Mr. Sean Kidney, co-founder and CEO, Climate Bonds Initiatives, to join us online. And please also welcome our panelists to join us on stage. They are Mr. Oswald Yao, founding and managing director, Reusable Consultancy Limited. Ms. Serena Mack, Executive Director, Sustainable Finance, Institutional Banking Group, DBS Bank Hong Kong Limited. Please welcome our guests with a warm round of applause. And Mr. Sean Kidney, you may begin now.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I can hear the warm round of applause all the way from Mexico City, where I currently am, joining you in the late hours here. Thank you for allowing me to join online in this particular fashion. Look, we're going to talk about the development of sustainable financial instruments. Before I introduce my great panelists, and I want to say a bit of context here. Sustainable financial instruments haven't grown because we kind of like the idea, like a cuddly koala bear. They've grown because there's a real need and a real reason. In fact, the origin of sustainable instruments have been investors very concerned around managing their long-term assets and liabilities in the context of climate change in particular, but other challenges, and being very interested in finding out where their money is going. when given a chance. To give them a chance, we developed about 14 years ago initially, and then over the last 10 years, this idea of thematic issuance. This is where an institution such as a government or a corporation issues a bond and promises to use the money in a certain fashion. It might be an SDG bond, or it might be a green bond, the largest slice in a particular market. Investors then have some comfort in a story they can tell their clients or their stakeholders about how their funds are being used, usually to address what's seen an area of risk to being able to make sustainable returns for those beneficiaries over a long period, such as climate change, which actuaries have been worrying about now for many years. This particular market, therefore, is grounded in addressing a challenge. That challenge is severe. We have had, over the last few years, greater and greater sense of urgency about what needs to be done. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report that's been coming out has talked about the need to reduce emissions by 50% globally by 2030. If we're to have a chance of having a sustainable future for our children and for our portfolios, because what's been very clear is that in the kind of world that's been posited, if we don't get our emissions down, severe volatility, conflict, famine, pandemics, there is no way that investors can ensure sustainable returns and pay your pension when you retire, let alone mine. And that's really the essence of the drive for this. The curious thing, which has helped investors get motivated about this, is that when it comes to our climate and environmental challenges, and the reason I say environmental is there's a basket of things that are all related. We're seeing a global collapse in biodiversity now, what many scientists are calling the sixth great extinction. Of the 60,000 tree species that we know of in the world, some 20,000 are about to become endangered or are already endangered. That's extraordinary. We're on the verge of losing a third of our world's tree species. And the same thing's been happening in insect life and marine life and so on. And that's linked to, of course, human impact on climate change and has to be addressed the same kind of way. More sustainable management of our planet, of our natural capital, of our societies and our cities. The solutions are very clear. We've been told for many years by our climate scientists and others what we have to do. But there's a challenge. It requires a lot of capital investment. According to McKinsey's in a report in January, they say we need to invest some $9.2 trillion a year in addressing just climate change mitigation before we tackle the challenge of resilience, which is probably another $5 trillion a year. These are enormous sums. Of course, we have the capital. One of the curious things about this particular challenge we face in the world now is that we have more capital on the planet now than ever before in human history. We've been quite successful at developing capital pools over the last 50 years. In many parts of the world, we have what's frankly surplus capital, which is why we have negative interest rates in German bunds, why we have negative interest rates in Japan. Too much capital, not enough places to go. Well, not enough places to go in the narrow environment there. Of course, we know in places like East Asia or South Asia or Africa or Latin America, there are many places where we need capital. We just have got to get it to shift to places where it's not currently shifted to. And that's our challenge at the moment in achieving the change. We've got proof that capital will flow. We have managed to grow this pretty extraordinary green and sustainable and sukuk market over the past few years, which is amounting to about $3 trillion outstanding. Is it enough? Well, I'm not sure whether it's really enough, but what I can tell you is that it's incredibly successful and growing like a rocket. And that gives me some hope. How do we make sure that it is enough going forward? Well, we need to grow this market. We're saying at Climate Bonds that we need to see some $5 trillion a year just in fixed income and debt market that's thematic, that's allocated to our environmental challenges going forward by 2025. We're going to, in the next 12 months or so, hit a run rate of $1 trillion a year. That's a pretty massive scaling up. There you go. That's the background. That's the story. The shape of the future has essentially been decided. What we now need to do is to ensure that we can achieve this change with the requisite speed. That's what the IPCC is telling us. Without that kind of speed of change, we don't have the success that we need to have. Okay, our panelists now, we have our colleague Sarita from DBS, leading regional bank, DBS Hong Kong, and Oswald from Riskology in Hong Kong, who's going to tell us a bit about his story. And I'm going to put a very simple question to them to get going. I'm going to say, how do we do this? How do we do this from this exciting, bubbling, but not big enough base to a world where capital flows in adequate volume and scale to the solutions that we need to see addressed? Serena, maybe I could ask you to kick us off.
Sure, definitely. You can hear me right, Sean?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I'll try to keep my comments brief to keep you awake at your late night in Mexico. So please feel free to make this interactive as well. Huh? So I think from a financial institution perspective, there's multiple facades to this, right? First of all, as you rightly mentioned, the capital really needs to flow in a higher speed to get to where we need to get to. Now, the question is the infrastructure, is the mechanism, is the reporting disclosure up to speed to kind of catch the bandwagon to make the train move faster, so to speak. Now, I think, with institutions like climate bonds, with institutions or the kind of taxonomies that's being developed, things are moving into the right direction. But what we also need is some kind of international coordination of what's the right or what's the consensus-driven kind of taxonomy to take, right? For example, for DBS, we have our own taxonomy about what we call green, what we call sustainable, but those are largely also driven based on the international standards. Now, if you think about each country having their own standards, which is good and is good development, but we also wanted to see some kind of convergence on those standards so that institution investors will know where the money is going to and they will be able to fulfill their requirements in reporting whichever they belong, especially in Europe where we know the regulation for disclosure is stringent. So the taxonomy, the mechanism is one way. Now the other way is how do we engage with the clients? Because now in Asia, I think there are a lot of, especially for banks like DBS, there are a lot of in Southeast Asian kind of power companies or those kind of energy companies that we wanted to engage them to. Now, I was in a discussion just a while ago, and then the investor was asking me, should we be just divesting? Should we be just not doing any should we be engaging them for catalyzing change, or should we be just divesting from it and call it a day and call myself carbon neutral, right? And honestly, I think the other part that we wanted to really get to is how we ensure that the client, we can help the client to transition into a low carbon future. Now, for us to engage the clients, a proper standard risk valuations like risk-free or like standards like climate bonds or global green loan principles are going to be tools that can help us to engage with the clients along with a lot of the right talents and knowledge for them to set up their own kind of KPIs to structure their sustainable financing. Then those will be some of the tools that I think will be essential for the capital market or for the bond market effectively to be moving in that direction. Because another thing that is a bit challenging is probably the post-issuance reporting space, where we wanted to ensure that the client is using the money in the right way, right? As Sean, you rightly pointed out, it started with people ring-fencing the assets and investments, trying to invest in specific projects. Now, what we wanted to ensure is that there's also a proper due diligence and proper guidance for us to be measuring those, be monitoring it, to ensure we don't get into the realms of greenwashing as well. So that's kind of like the fine balance to tread. But I don't know, Oswald, I think you probably also have something to share as well.
Sean, you got somewhere to go?
Please, Oswald, I want to know your story about setting up Riskology, which you're the founder of, and why. And then I'm interested in you, an appetite, but just a question to Serena, if I can. Serena, are your clients interested, or are you having to push? Tell me, what's the appetite?
It's a combination of which is great, because for certain clients, the sustainability is not as high on their agenda, just because they have other priorities due to the macro environment for obvious reasons. So what we can help them is, what we can help them with is to also kind of make sure we engage them to have a constructive discussion to say, look, if you engage in sustainability right now, if you invest in energy efficiency right now, if you invest in renewable energy right now, it is good for you in the longer run. You'll see the return is probably going to be like a 5 to 10 year turnaround, or maybe even shorter, but there is a business case in it. So that's kind of where we are trying to engage the clients. Now, for the other part of clients, we are seeing an uptake of passion towards these kind of green and sustainability-linked products. So it's good traction that we are seeing, but we also wanted to ensure that we are catalyzing and accelerating the change by pulling more clients on board.
Thank you. Oswald, I'm interested in this extraordinary organisation you built, and how it contributes to how you're seeing it contribute to this change, and also your view about the changing nature of the appetite for discussion about transition, about these instruments in your client base.
Yep. I can share more about my experience from my professional. I'm the ESG consulting, and I'm the valuer as well. So I combine with different professional discipline that I strongly agree with Serena. What she's mentioned about is, do we have a standard to let every practitioner to have a guideline, or not just for the financial institution, even for a general public? We heard about what is called ESG nowadays, or the green finance, but from my experience that even the listed company or some of the big company in Hong Kong or in China, they have the idea, or they don't have the knowledge about this. My past experience is, they want to apply, or they want to know more about the green finance or the sustainability-linked loan, but they don't even have one person or an expertise in their team. So as a consultant of the companies that, first of all, we need to educate them. What is it about? And why I need to educate them for this? Because they just think about, oh, I have a project. And Oswald or Whiskery, could you please make some green to our project and then let us to have a loan from the bank? This is absolutely, I don't know, say it is wrong or right or wrong, because from every company or organization or from their different prospect, they need to have done their work for the boss, all right? But why, I will think about is why they ask that such a kindergarten questions from the very fundamental knowledge, because they're absent of it at all. So from my experience, and I would like to say is the government has to be or must be to educate everyone if we wanted to go green healthily, and how to speed up at that industry. First of all, I think, as Serena said, we need to have a regulatory body to set up a standard or framework to let every practitioner know how could we to apply or issue a green sustainability loan or green bond or even just a green loan, okay? And then to avoid the greenwashing, right? Because I think one of the very, very conservative from the bank perspective is, how can the bank they know, is this really a green project or just a colored green? This is very, very important. And also, to see our government, they launched in the past few months that our talent pool in Hong Kong, the government has already put up the ESG talent as our pool, try to attract the ESG expertise from everywhere, every country or every city. Because our government knows that at this moment or in the recent years, we have not enough expertise, such like Dr. William Yu, and I couldn't find another one just like him. That's why we need to import more talent for us. Maybe Sean, would you like to come to Hong Kong to help? Yes, that's the fast track to speed up what our content discussed today, right? So, and also, I think the educational, like the university, as I remember that, the HKUST has launched the first bachelor degree in Hong Kong, is focusing on the green finance. But just start this year, 2022. And the first will be in our industry, the first batch of the graduate will be 4 years, right? Or 3 years? 4 years later. We have a 4 years time from now. We don't have our graduate student or expert. That is why I totally agree that our government is importing the outside expertise to help us to develop a good development from the very foundation from now on. And also, I think for the general public, as what I said very beginning of my talk, is why we need to well-educated for the general public, because we talk about the financial instrument, right? Financial instrument, I think, are from a traditional capital market. Most of us like the bonds or forward or contract or options, right? Because I worry about is they just treat the green or sustainability finance as the traditional one. It will miss it or detract it. What is the main focus for the sustainability? That's why I also wanted everyone need to know what is a real sustainability, not just another like the other traditional capital financial instrument. Yes, that's what from my past experience. Sean?
Well, look, thank you for the kind offer to move to Hong Kong, Oswald. And now that transport's a little bit easier than it used to be, you'll certainly see me there sooner. And we hope to host our Climate Bonds Hong Kong conference in April, May. So keep an eye out for that. Unfortunately, my children are where I live nowadays, so I'll have to stay close to them. You know what it's like, family. I've got my first granddaughter coming at Christmas, so it's very special for me, which means I have to stay over where I am. But I do want to say that the skills issue you raised is a critically important issue. And we've got partnerships with the Hong Kong Chinese University and Hong Kong University Business School already. But yes, it's slow, isn't it? Yes. Although, Serena, you've got the skills and you've managed to develop these in DBS. How much is this capability issue a major issue, or are you able to find a way within a large institution with some internal skills and systems to be able to solve this problem of standardizing, commoditizing, sharing the knowledge about how to do things so more business can get done? How much is this a big issue?
I would think that the issue it's getting addressed. So further to what Os was mentioning, we were talking about the UST probably just also because I'm the alumni. There's also kind of international accreditations out there. For example, the Hong Kong Monetary Authority actually has what is now called the Green and Sustainable Finance Training Repository, and in it there is a list of kind of international certifications that people can take up. For example, the Certified ESG Analyst Program organized by the European Federation, the AFES Society. So that there are, for professionals currently in the financial institution wanting to upskill themselves to get into something that is ESG linked, green and sustainability related, there is a way to upskill and get trained. So that's the external component of it. And what we were hoping to do, I think also when I was also kind of chatting offline on this, is that it would be great to have certain level of subsidy from the relevant organizations to help the overall upskilling of the financial industry practitioners. Now that's kind of one level of external. Now internally, what can we really do? The financial institution, I think within DBS we have, that's one of the reasons why we set up the taxonomy. Because once we have a standardized framework about what we call green and what we call sustainable in each of the industries, it makes a really good starting reference point for all our internal stakeholders to at least know what can or cannot what they can and cannot classify, or what they can think about as potential business opportunities. So the framework exists exactly to kind of assist for that conversation. Now internally, we're also doing a lot of internal stakeholder engagements on materials around all the frameworks and available resources that's out there. For example, for Hong Kong, I think Oswald was also talking about this. There are subsidy programs from the government for corporates who wanted to issue their first green or sustainability-linked instruments. Same for Singapore, actually. So these are available informations we wanted to push out. So that we can equip our internal stakeholders better for that. Now, the good thing though is we have done it on a sector basis. So we feel like for us to decarbonize the portfolio, there's certain components, there's certain sectors that can play a particularly large part, right? I think the power, the oil and gas, the auto. So for example, so what we can also do is based on each of the sector for the clients that we serve, we have a specific a guidance or white paper issued about how we can work with them to decarbonize their portfolio as well. So these are some of the kind of publications that we have done to try to accelerate this and try to kind of catalyze the overall conversations. But actually, Sean, back to your point, I think from a capability perspective, I think it's a matter of awareness and training, which there are ample trainings out there. And thus, it's more getting the financial industry practitioners, the corporates, understanding the importance and the benefits that doing ESG and getting into sustainability will help themselves and the corporations. Then the incentive will come for them to want to get trained. Then the rest is history, because there's already a lot of good training programs out there that can allow people to scale themselves up if needed.
Good point. And a little advert here. We'll be launching our joint climate bonds initiative, International Capital Markets Association Green Bonds training in Hong Kong early in the new year, and adding to the options. Of course, we have, as you mentioned, with the Hong Kong Monetary Authority's green guidelines, green bond issuance guidelines program, already some of that guidance that Oswald was saying we need in the sector. And we see that in Singapore and other markets. Of course, the taxonomy work that we've done in China, in Europe, in Singapore, in Thailand, and we expect to see happening with the Hong Kong Monetary Authority in the next 6 months, is in a way another means of making it simpler for people, creating a straightforward shopping list of what counts, so you can go about doing the structuring stuff, but having to worry about the environmental inclusion and minimize the transaction cost, a really critical point in doing taxonomies. So there is work underway to make it easier, but your point, Oswald, still stands about the broader need to equip our people to be able to better meet the challenges of the future, including in climate finance. But not only that, it's the environmental engineering jobs, it's the energy planning in a different kind of world going forward, it's the rebuilding of our cities to be resilient. What does that mean? What kind of skills you need to do? There's so much to be done. But I'm interested in deal flow, because the immediate thing is to get deals out of the way, to excite our customers about the capital availability it'll flow, to also excite our governments about what can be done, because there's proof of concept. And so I'm curious to know from you, Oswald, what you see as the question I asked you before, really, the appetite amongst the clients you have. Has it changed in the last few years? Do you see it's growing, or what do we need to do to just get more of the existing clients acting? You've mentioned education. I'm just curious about what you're seeing and how optimistic you are, as well as further suggestions. And then, Serena, I'm going to ask you exactly the same question.
Okay.
Oswald.
Yep. I think from, as what I say, from our client or existing client, their appetite is one of their key concerns. Of course, they want to loan or to finance as much as they can. That's realistic, right? But however, one of the key concerns from them is as what Serena say, is the transaction cost. Because it's back to our very first beginning say, why the transaction cost is the very concern is two things, I think. One is they don't have the knowledge, and that is why they just waste their money to do what they prefer was. However, up to the bank or up to the financial institution, they're totally wrong. They went to the other side before for their applications. I think the transition cost is very, very important for the bank, even the applicant. And the second thing is because no regulation at all, I can say, DBS is out of the other, for the rest of the Southeast Asia bank, they're the first bank to launch the taxonomy. I think this is a very good practice as a model for the rest of the bank. But however, as I know, if I'm wrong, please correct me, Serena. Your DBS taxonomy is just for your internal, right? As a framework or guidance for your client or for your internal investigation of the client or the project, right? It doesn't, with any like HKMA or governments, they don't have the governing on that, right? Because it's just the framework developed by yourself, by DBS itself, right?
Well, our framework has a second-party opinion associated with it, but we basically try to align ourselves. But I think you do have a good point about what are the guidelines that the government will be supporting, because I think that will be a little bit of a challenging territory, just because these things are continuously evolving. So think about what can be labeled green a few years ago to what can be labeled green or sustainability linked currently. The taxonomy or not just the taxonomy, actually, I think the investor appetite also evolves, right? For example, if you have a client who wanted to do a project particularly green, however, the overall institution or corporate does not have that reputation, you get into a little bit of a dangerous territory as to can you really call it green or can you not? What would be the investor sentiment around that? So with an evolving world, it's a bit hard to have regulation that kind of draws the line in blood and say these are things you can and cannot do, because it limits the flexibility of it, and it also kind of limits the creativity of the businesses that wants to do something green, right? So what we wanted to do, I think overall, is provide some kind of guidance document to have to get people started. Like the climate bond taxonomy, to get people started to think about what can and cannot be done, and everybody kind of, the whole industry evolves kind of along the way. So for example, for us, we've done We've done clients, we've supported clients on bus companies transitioning into less emitting buses in Hong Kong. We've supported photovoltaic glass companies to do, solar panels. We've also supported Indonesia energy transition mechanisms as the advisor. So we're doing kind of a myriad of different things. And are they all on taxonomy in the black and white form? I think it's a little bit difficult, but as guidance, I think this is where we can the documents are here to help. But as you and I were talking about on the SMEs, right, the real economy, then the taxonomies need to be a bit more kind of scalable and a little bit more in detail so that it can be done on a smaller amount for a broader population. That's another kind of angle to it as well.
Exactly. And just think about from my head is just talk about the client's appetite is the going things would be the carbon credit. Few of my friends from their financial background, they are scaling the volunteer market. They try to prepare some financial instrument backed up with the CCER. That is, yes, because I have another skill set is the carbon credit, the carbon credit trader. So that is another, I think would be just like a NFT or crypto before. The CCER, yes, would be the coming one, because the Chinese government probably they will announce from the end of this year or early first quarter to reactivate the slipping carbon credit market voluntary. Yes. So this is another new thing that the market will be focusing on for the coming months. That's what is from the market participant told me.
Look, it's useful, Oswald, but it's a modest revenue stream compared to the revenue streams for businesses and corporates and governments. So I'm going to say there's lots of things we can do to improve the terms of trade for transition. Carbon markets is one. Frankly, regulation is one. A significant boost to the creditworthiness of Philips was the European Parliament banning incandescent light bulbs. Very simple. Didn't cost the government anything. They gave a forward plan banning in 5 years' time. And of course, the stocks of certain companies and their abilities to do green deals went through the roof. Governments can do things like that. I have a view that there should not be any new building built in Hong Kong that isn't of a very high standard. That's a simple government regulatory measure, level playing field for everyone, which the government could do tomorrow morning. And that would make the green deals to be able to be done in those green buildings much more viable. I think there's a lot of different levers we can pull. Carbon prices are one of those, taking advantages. The key thing, though, underpinning all of this is keeping it simple and commoditizing and standardizing, because the more we can standardize all of these things and reduce the transaction costs through that, the more it'll take off. I mean, we need Serena's clients to be able to understand easily what counts without having to, without having to hire KPMG to solve the problem for them.
Which is probably what's happening right now.
Now, KPMG do great work on transition, as do EY, as do Deloitte, and so on. But I want to minimize the effort and cost and make it easy for people to tell, which is what we're doing with taxonomies, with green bond guidelines. The G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group, co-chaired by Dr. Ma Jun, has been putting out principles for things like taxonomies and sustainable finance measures. There's work underway globally, which I think will provide the framework. And I think, Serena, at DBS, you've been reaping the benefits of some of these already, right? We have established practices such as the ASEAN Regulators Green Bond Guidelines, which just give you a framework you can operate in. Have I got that right?
Indeed, definitely, because for banks where we needed to have some sort of framework and have a certain level of risk governance around how we structure certain products, the existence of taxonomy principles and guidelines is a huge catalyst for commoditizing, or I think at the current stage it's probably making it more mainstream. our goal, our aspiration, Sean is aligned, is in the sense that we wanted to make this commoditized. So you shouldn't have to jump over hurdles to kind of set your own KPIs and understand what's a material relevance for your business, compared to you walk into a bank and try to get a business loan for your mortgage or for a factory, for example. And to commoditize, it's a bit, I think there's some way to go, which is where work is required. But at the very least, the existence of the frameworks and the principles have already been a tremendous driving force to make these products mainstream, more acceptable across the investor universe, as well as banks, as well as to the corporates. So what we also would like to see eventually, right, is the proliferation of these standards and then eventually converging into something that is more easy, simple, and understood. Then the scale can further pick up, commoditize across the value chain, because currently, as also was mentioning, the transactional cost is prohibitive. And if transactional cost is prohibitive, the institutions or the clients who can do these kind of products are limited to a certain subset. So as we can commoditize it further, then it trickles down the value chain, then eventually that there'll be just more of these products and more of these bonds in the market. I do expect and aspire that one day all bonds in the market will either be green or sustainability linked or have some kind of affiliation to it. And I don't think that will be an overstatement eventually.
Well, I heard from one of your competitor banks recently that corporate issuance in East Asia, excluding Japan, went up this year from 25% last year to 33% so far this year, which is extraordinary. Bond markets are down, but the share of thematic continues to rise. So it looks like you're absolutely correct, Serena. Another tidbit, and this, Oswald, picking up your point, is that despite the little bit of chaos around standards and guidelines of commoditization, which we're trying to fix, in December last year, the gross revenues of all the global banks from sustainable business overtook the gross revenues from fossil fuel business for the first time. Whoa, things are changing. Have we done that already at DBS, Serena?
Well, we look at sustainable business as one of our main business imperatives, but we try to keep them as part of. Okay, one thing we can indeed mention is DBS has a sustainable finance target of 50 billion up to 2024, and glad to report, as at 2022 June, we have already hit the target. Our sustainable finance instruments has hit over 52 billion in Sing dollars, and in Hong Kong, the amount is also quite sizable. So we are actually. Good to see the clients actually kind of joining hands with us in these kind of initiatives, because unless the clients are willing to work with us on the sustainability linked facilities, I can't clap with one hand.
There we go. Listen, I think we're running out of our time for our session. We're coming to the end. Reflections on going forward. I started off talking about the incredible challenge we face, Tracy and Oswald. What we need to do to, let's be clear, to create a future for our children. And if we don't make this transition, it's a very, very difficult world that we go into. But of course, we have hope because of the things we're talking about, because the deal flow we're seeing, because the interest on capital, because the corporates now willing to talk transition like before. Okay, but we've got a long way to go. I've just a couple of parting thoughts for our audience around the world about how this is going to unfold, and I suppose what you see as the hopeful trends. Perhaps I can start with you, Oswald, first, and then go to Serena.
Yes, my last few words is my utopian future would be to make the industry is more transparent, and then I think everyone in here, not mean in Hong Kong or in China, it means in the global, all right? I think everyone should be participating as soon as possible, specified like how can we line up with the scientists and also the capital guys together with the government. I think this three party is very, very important because some of the capital guys just, we have a casual talk is they don't really care about what is the green or sustainability because they're just focusing the money. Because they don't know what is the important, why the scientists always says 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees. They still just think about how can I get the to optimize their bank account or the company. I think one more very important thing is they need to realize that if 20 years later or 50 years later, there will be no more land or 50% of the land will be under the water. So I think, that's the last but not the least. The word is the government, the scientists, and also the capital market. They need to really think about what should we do from now on. Not just money.
I have a couple things. I think.
Sorry, Oswald.
No worries. We were. I think as a summary of what we have just discussed, I think those are. We spoke about mainly three things. One is transparency. Transparency in terms of the taxonomy guiding people, transparency in terms of corporates disclosing what they needed to disclose, reporting, right? So transparency being the first T. Now the second T is the transition. The need to help the corporates to transition lies in many places, lies in governments, lies in universities, lies in private sectors, lies in taxonomy setting bodies, lies in regulators. Basically, everybody needs to help. Otherwise, if you try to just divest from a company and not try to help them to transition, then it's probably not. It's going to be a less effective proposition than working with the corporates on a constructive way to help them to eventually transition. So that's kind of another thing I wanted to reflect on. Now the last thing will be talent. We spoke at length about all the training programs that's needed, all the universities that's kind of having new programs, and I think that the talent part of it is going to kind of go hand in hand with our awareness, interest, and everything else. So I mean, if the ASEAN sustainable green bonds grow from 33% to 40 to 50, then naturally there will be an influx of talents coming in, and that would kind of also trickle down the system, eventually making everybody, or both the financial industry and the corporates, more ESG aware. That hopefully is kind of the trend to go for, at least in the future.
Fantastic. Serena, we're rolling out a new certification product in January that I hope is going to help your work, which is transition plan certifications. So we can identify, so for the whole entity, for the whole company, to give them some credibility in the market to be able to raise capital around it. So watch this space, everyone. And let's see if I can help make Serena's job easier, which is so important.
Looking forward.
But look, to wrap up, we have a tsunami of change coming through. We have a tsunami of capital investment that's required, that is beginning to appear around the world. It's a race about whether we can make these changes enough and deploy this capital fast enough against the race to get emissions down. Can we get it down fast enough to be able to avoid catastrophe? But one thing I can tell you is that there is going to be enormous investment in the kinds of things that have now become required to meet China's transition plans, Japan's transition plans, the US's transition plans, the European Union's transition plans, even India's transition plans. The world is going green at a rapid pace. The opportunities, if you can ride the tsunami, if you can surf it, if you like, are immense. But of course, the risks, if you get hit by not being ready, by not being prepared, by not becoming future fit, are enormous. You could go under. That's the nature of the world ahead of us going forward. I'm hoping, in fact, I'm optimistic that most companies, most organizations will be able to head together because we have things like the taxonomy to support us, because we are channeling the science, and because we've got fantastic people like Serena and Oswald working to make this change. I know we've got to educate more, but we're not starting from scratch here. We already have a platform of people and a platform of deals. $3 trillion US globally is not too bad as a startup. That gives me hope, and I think that's what the future holds. More of this, much, much more. It requires all of us to work, though. And I'm going to just leave you with my parting thought. Run, don't walk. There's so much to do. We have to run. Thank you, Serena, for joining me. Thank you, Oswald, for joining us. Thank you
Thanks,
to our
Sean.
audience.